In this video, we're going to look at a quick introduction to quadratic polynomials. So in order to figure out how to solve an equation or how to get anything useful out of an equation, it's kind of important for us to understand what type of equation it is. And quadratic polynomials are pretty unique. So for a quadratic polynomial, the thing that you have to remember is that the highest degree of the exponent is 2. So for example, what do I mean by degree of the exponent, all that good stuff? All right, let's look at an example of something that's quadratic. So if we have y equals x plus 4x squared minus 3. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, so in this particular equation, in this particular function, we have 3 terms. And each of these terms have different features going on here. So in this one we have an x, but it's raised only to the power of 1. In this term we have an x again, but this one is raised to the power of 2. Here we have no x, so there's no x raised to any power, so you can think of it as x to the 0. Now the highest exponent that our variable x is raised to is 2. And that means that if our highest exponent is 2, that's automatically a quadratic function, or a quadratic polynomial. So you're always going to look at the exponents to determine if what we're looking at is a quadratic polynomial. So for example, here's another one. X squared plus 4x to the 5th minus 3. Now, is that a quadratic polynomial? Well, you'd ask yourself, of course, what's my exponents? We have an exponent of 2 here, an exponent of 5 here, and no exponent over here, which means that our highest exponent is not 2, which means that this is not a quadratic. No way. It's not a quadratic. All right, but this one is because our highest exponent is 2. So now we're going to just start to look at how to factor quadratic expressions, because when we factor a quadratic expression, it will take us one step closer to being able to solve a quadratic equation. All right, so let's look at how to factor a quadratic expression. Okay, so now we're almost ready to factor a simple quadratic polynomial. But before we do, let's talk about what is factoring and why would we want to even do that. All right, so in its current state, we have an x squared here. If this were an actual equation equal to 0, equal to something, it would be pretty annoying to solve with that x squared in place. So what we can do is separate this whole thing into its factors, and then it becomes pretty simple to solve. So in this video, we're just going to look at how to factor. Later on, we'll look at how to factor and solve, and we'll look at harder expressions. But I just want to introduce this to you today. All right, so here we have an expression, and it's not in standard form. So what does standard form mean? Well, in standard form, you have the x squared first, then you have whatever has an x next, a term with an x next, and finally you have your constant. So the degree of the exponents have to decrease. So here we have 2x to the second power, x to the first power, and no x to the 0 power. And that's what you want to do to your equation. Make sure that the degree is decreasing. So we're going to take our original function or expression, and we're going to have x squared plus 2x minus 15. So I switched it so that we could have decreasing order of exponents. So from 2 to 1 to no exponent for the x. All right, now that that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to look for 2 numbers, and our 2 numbers have to satisfy 2 criteria. All right, what are those 2 criteria? The 2 numbers have to have a product, so multiply to get C, meaning negative 15 in this case, and have to have a sum, so they have to add up to get B. And in this case, or B is 2. So they have to have a product of negative 15 in this example and a sum of 2. So we have to think of two numbers that multiply to get negative 15 and add to get 2. Once you think of those numbers, you're going to put them in two sets of parentheses. So what are those two numbers? If you said negative 3 and positive 5, you are correct. Those two numbers do multiply to get negative 15 and add to get 2. All right, so what now? Now we can finish it up by separating this x squared. So remember that we're factoring, so we're factoring this x squared. We're just separating it into its two factors, which is pretty easy. It's x and x. So when you factor our original expression here, this is the solution that you get. Now, if you want to do a check just to make sure it works, that would be a great idea. So we can FOIL to check. And by FOIL, you may already know what I mean. It just means multiply the first term by each other, the outer terms by each other, the inner terms by each other, and the last terms by each other. So first, outer, inner, last. We get x squared plus 5x minus 3x minus 15. When you join your like terms, you do in fact get negative 15x, which means that we have factored correctly.